When I sew this, there's two different things I can do. I can sew looking at this side, the wrong side of my fabric, and that will let me make sure that I'm always catching this fold right here. So this facing that's folded over, it'll make sure that I'm always catching that. So I can do that, or I can sew on this other side. And this will let me see exactly what people will see when they look at the outside of my hood, right? Because this is the right side of my fabric and I'm sewing right on top of it, so the stitch is going to be very visible. So you can choose which one is more important to you. If you're a little nervous that you didn't do an exact 1 inch all the way around, or you're nervous about catching it, I would recommend sewing on this side. But if you feel confident enough that you want to look at this other side, the right side of the fabric, I would encourage you to do that if you feel confident. If not, no worries, you can look at the other side. It's going to be the exact same thing. I'm just looking at a different side of the fabric. So I'm going to line this up, not with the 1 inch because I have everything folded over at 1 inch, and 1 inch is the edge of our stitch plate, and not with the 7/8 of an inch because there might be some places where I'm a little short and I might not catch this facing. So I'm going to go over to the 6/8 or 3/4, which is right next to the 5/8. If you look a little closer, let's look a little closer. So you can see there's 5/8 right here. And then this would be 6/8, that would be 7/8, and that would be 1 inch. So I'm going to do the 6/8, which is this line right here. That's what I'm going to line up with, so I make sure that I catch my facing. And I'm going to sew looking at the wrong or the right side of my fabric because this is a really visible seam, so I want to see what it looks like and know if I need to fix anything. But if you feel a little nervous about your fold or you're about catching everything, go ahead and sew this side. Or if you sew for a little while and you realize, okay, I'm kind of struggling catching my fold, I'd recommend just stop, unpick what you have, and then start again on the other side. So I'm going to go forward 3, backward 3, and also just keeping everything in line with this right here, my 6/8. And I want to make sure this is a really straight line because it's going to be very visible. So it should be parallel to my fold. I'll just sew that. Keeping my finger out of the way of my needle. Some threads in my way. So 6/8, which is also 3/4. And before I move on very much further, I'm just going to fold this over and look. Okay, I did catch this whole area right here. Just double checking. If I didn't catch that whole area, then maybe I want to think about unpicking that area. And like if I didn't catch all of this facing, see how the facing is sewn down? If I didn't sew all that down, I might think about repicking and just starting again, looking at this side so I can make sure I'm always catching it. Because you don't want any holes. And keep sewing my 3/4. Stopping when I get to my pin. Going to double check that everything's folded nice underneath. And this part right here, I think I'm going to put another pin in. You can't really see, but there's a big section without pins, so I'm going to go ahead and put another pin in. That'll make me feel better. I'm approaching the seam, and it's going to get kind of bulky here, so I want to make sure my machine doesn't get stuck. That's why I trimmed everything earlier, and I left widest to the world, and then underneath that is like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if things are getting stuck, you can just give it a gentle pull to help guide it. You don't want to like yank it or anything. I'll just keep sewing this. I'm going to sew down and just finish it off, so I'll do the exact same thing. I'm just following the 3/4 line, and I'll finish it off. After sewing my hood facing, I'm just going to run my fingers along the facing and my seam line. I'm going to make sure there's no holes. So I'm just kind of pressing up against, I'm using my finger to press up against this seam just to see if my finger will poke through anywhere. I'm going to go all the way around just to make sure I don't have any holes. So I'm good. If you do have a hole, what you're going to want to do is unpick a little section around it. So if my hole was right here, I'd unpick probably like a 1/2 inch before and 1/2 inch after. I'd unpick that section, then I would pin it. I'd pull this little piece of the facing over a little bit more so I will catch it. I would pin it in place, and then I would be really, really careful how I sew on here because you see this seam. So I'd go right on top of that same seam, back before I have unpicked. So I'd start a little bit before I unpicked, probably like a 1/4 inch before I unpicked. I'd backstitch just a little bit, so like 3 stitches forward, 3 stitches backwards, go forward. I'd want to be really, really careful because this seam is going to be seen, so you want to be right on top of the seam line that's already there. I'd sew past the hole, so say the hole is like right here. I'd sew past the hole. Then when I'm past and I'm on top of my seam line again, I'd backstitch. So you want to make sure that it's going to be really neat because this is going to be very visible. It's going to be on the outside of your hood. But that's what you can do if you do have a hole. If you're nervous about it, you can always ask me or a friend for advice, but that's what you'll do.